Welcome to the Innovation Storytellers podcast. We talk to innovators and disruptors in R&D, product managers, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, innovation thought leaders, and their storytellers who help bring their amazing ideas to life. Now, here's your host, Innovation Storyteller, CEO, speaker, and coach to the world's top innovation teams, Susan Lindner.
Hi, I'm Susan Lindner, and welcome to Innovation Storytellers, the podcast that helps bring innovators and storytellers together to make sure innovation reaches its final destination. For the last 20 years, I've been helping innovators and disruptors to tell their stories. 10 acquisitions, hundreds of innovative products, and countless hockey stick growth curves later, I want to share how great innovations get to market using stories to pave the way. I'm incredibly fortunate today to have Carol Barash with me, who's going to tell us a little bit about how storytelling has been the transformative power in helping young people to achieve their goals and for them to reach their employment and academic destinations. So Carol Barash is an award-winning education innovator and entrepreneur, and Carol has spent more than 20 years building solutions at the intersection of teaching, technology, and community. And she started Story2 to teach people how to transform themselves and their communities through the art and science of storytelling. Carol, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan. Really happy to be here.
So, not everyone kind of gets started in this journey with an understanding of that they're going to be an innovator, and frankly, that storytelling is going to be the path that gets them there. But you have magically fused these two things together. How did it all get started? Because you didn't think of yourself as an innovator from the get-go, is that right?
Well, I think I always was an innovator. My parents were definitely innovators. They ran this really zippy little advertising agency illegally, I think, from the basement of our house when I was a little girl. And when you went down the stairs into the office, you had to be a grown-up. At age 4 or 5, you went down those stairs, no show of emotions or no needs, no anything. And, so around the dinner table, I learned about, cash flow and payroll. And also just how do you solve customer problems? And my parents my parents were first generation college students. They met at Penn State. They arrived at Penn State, neither of them had any money. And they innovated their way to be community leaders. They networked their way to just know who you needed to know to get things done in a small community where there were very few Jewish people. My father used to say he was a registered Republican because nobody would loan money to Democrats.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was a while ago, but it was not easy. And, they created the Central Pennsylvania Festival of the Arts. They created Town and Gown, which is one of the most famous, college town magazines in the country. They were always they would see something and try it. Those things didn't all work. A lot of those things they did for other people, but it was very much in the water I was drinking, in my mother's breast milk, as it were. Very, very creative parents. So, my father, the last day of his life, I was in 11th grade, and I came home from school. And I walked into the living room to spend time with him, and his stomach was bloated, and his face had this horrible purple rash, and his breath was horrible. I just couldn't kiss him. And he said, "Sit down. There's something really important I have to tell you." Mm-hmm. And he told me about the importance of education, going to college, but it wasn't like the college. It was an attitude to learning and always be learning. And he was he was drifting in and out of consciousness. He was partly there and partly somewhere else. And then he said this thing that for a long time was really a burden, which was, Carol, you're going to invent something. You're going to create something that never existed before. But it's going to take you a long time to put the pieces together. So you need to be patient.
Wow.
And it did take me a while.
Wow. That's a blessing and a burden. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was blessed with an amazing education, right? Undergraduate at Yale, PhD at Princeton. My mom paid for Yale, and Princeton, played for me to be in this intellectual sandbox and learn how to do research and how to pitch new ideas and all sorts of transferable skills for being a CEO. But the thing about storytelling and self-advocacy and community building, it starts when I'm in 11th grade. That also starts in 11th grade. Mm-hmm. And my AP English teacher, he didn't think I could write. And when it came time to apply to college, he's like, you shouldn't apply to Yale. Like, you won't get into Yale. And if you got into Yale, you couldn't write well enough to survive there.
Wow.
Like, under my breath, I'm swearing at him. And, okay, well, then it doesn't. And I looked at him, I'm like, well, it doesn't hurt to try. Sounding just like my immigrant grandmother who cleaned houses. Mm. And, you get 0% of what you don't try for. So I tried, I won, I arrived at Yale, I couldn't write. I really had to start over. And I went to my professor's recommendation. He said, you just start over, one sentence at a time. And he sent me, to the stacks of Sterling Memorial Library and fifth floor, fourth floor, critics, literary critics, George Orwell, Adrienne Rich, Virginia Woolf. He's like, just read things and imitate them. And I found myself reading these things out loud and then writing them in my journal. I'd go back to my room. I'd copy them out in my journal. And then in my room, I would replace George Orwell's words with my words, his rhythm, but my words. And I did this, I'd come back from crew practice, I'd a quick dinner, I'd go to the library, and I relearned writing. First I did a sentence, then I'd do a couple sentences, then I'd look at how 3 pages held together. And I relearned how to write by imitating great writers, but under my breath speaking. It was like poetry I was reading out loud. It was that precious. I'm at Rutgers, a decade later, and we're in a faculty meeting and they need one more person to teach developmental English. That's the people, who are struggling. And I'm like, well, I struggled. I want to teach them. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked that when I got them to speak, talk through where they were stuck, everything got easier. Just like for me, it was that under my breath connection between speaking and writing that unlocked the mysteries for them. Wow. And I, created all sorts of ways to at scale, for all, and it's, as much as a university can scale, to teach these students. And I even did it in a big lecture class, to write more like they talk. And if they got really stuck and talking wouldn't do, well, then walk around, because there's just this physicality of language and communication that just, it dies in English classes. I think I'm allowed to say that because I was an English teacher. And, I thought I'd really invented something. Well, it's another decade later, maybe 15 years later, and I'm at Macaulay Honors College. I'm back in higher ed. I spent this decade in marketing. It's a whole other story. I was inventing companies there, but reporting to the CEO and the chair of the company. It was a great gig. And I worked in an innovative EdTech think tank. My first job after teaching. Anyway, I've done a lot of innovative things, but where it lands that matters for us today is 2008. My middle daughter goes to college, my baby goes to boarding school, and I'm alone with myself and my husband and my thoughts for the first time in 21 years. My older son went to college a year before that. And I'm spending more and more time working. I get there when it's dark, it's fall. I leave, it's dark. And one day, just the room starts to spin. And every time I tell this story, I get short of breath because when it's only happened to me like 2 or 3 times in my whole life. And it was a wake up call every single time. But it's like the colors, there's just colors spinning around the room and you can't make it stop. Eventually it'll stop, but while it's spinning, it feels like it'll never stop. Stop spinning. I walked outside to get fresh air. I called a friend who is a psychiatrist. He invited me to see him later that day, that same day. I'm sitting there and he's like, what happened? And I tell him about the room spinning and he said, well, that's a panic attack, but what, Carol, what's it trying to show you? And I just start weeping. I mean, noisy, awful, messy, crying. And I said, nobody knows me. So when I went to college, I locked away all the things that happened when I was a child that shouldn't happen to anybody. I locked it in a box and I said, I'm going to become a new person at Yale. And my sister says I came home for Thanksgiving with a different way of talking. But I was just going to put my childhood way, way, way behind me. And my daughters go off to, my daughters leave home and it all comes back. And he says, do you want to talk?
Right?
Yeah. And he says, do you want to talk about it? I'm like, absolutely not. It's safe away over there in the box. And so then he said this thing that just completely changed my life. He said, okay, you can do whatever you want with that box, but I have an invitation for you. You are a writer, you're a teacher, you're an innovator. He actually used that word. He said, I invite you to go back in that box, not as Carol, the character, but as Carol, the narrator. And you're safe. None of those things are happening to you here in the present. It was a long time ago, and you may not feel this way, but everybody did the best they could at the time, including you. Mm-hmm. And so I invite you to go back in there as the narrator, like the narrator of a 19th century novel. And I'm thinking, Middlemarch, George Eliot. I know those things. I've read them all a bunch of times. And go back there as the narrator and decide what you want to do with those things, those stories from your childhood. You're safe. You can do whatever you want. And then he said, and he paused, and then he said, and once you figure that out for yourself, maybe the world's telling you that you should teach it to other people. And again, he says, you're a teacher, you love young people, maybe you want to teach this thing to other people. I went back to my office. My boss gave me an assignment that required storytelling. Twice in one day I was given storytelling. I started reading about the neuroscience of storytelling. That's what I've been doing ever since that confluence of things, which, I'm not particularly, I have a lot of faith, but not in a religious kind of way. I sort of feel like I landed that day at the thing my father saw a long time ago. And I've been doing it ever since. And it's definitely all the crazy wins and losses and failures make sense, preparing me for this work of bringing the science of storytelling to scale, because it makes speaking and writing and collaborating so easy, so much easier than everything we've been taught in school and at work and blah, blah, blah. And I just want to get it to as many people as possible. And the only way you can do that is with technology.
So, for those of us who are listening, right, this is a community of innovators and storytellers that follow us here on Innovation Storytellers. So give people a little bit of color and background about what is Story2 and how you developed it.
So Story2 is this zippy little startup where we teach young people how to tell their stories out loud and then how to use the science of storytelling to produce what we call high stakes communication. So to prepare for interviews, to write emails that get opened, to write college admission essays yourself, based on your real experience, not some 40-year-old's idea of what you're supposed to say. So high stakes communication improved with storytelling. And really what we do, I read, it's 12 years since 2008 when the room started spinning. So it's actually just about this time of year. There wasn't as much science then. There were a few articles, but not so much. And not everybody was talking about storytelling then either. You had to take a lot more on faith at the time.
Yeah.
But the science is really clear about the role that storytelling plays in building human community. I'm going to tell you what that role is, and then I'm going to tell you how it works, and then I'm going to tell you how Story2 uses that. So neuroscientists believe that storytelling evolved to help people navigate between tribe and other. So you reach a boundary where it's the limits of what you know today, and you run into somebody you've never seen before, and you start trying to communicate with them, and somehow you find something in common. Well, that thing you find in common, which is the beginning of community, your brain knows how to do that. And over time, the brain's gotten better about it. But the human brain, it's called mental mirroring. When you tell a story, 3 things are activated in your brain: memories, emotions, and action.
Memories, emotions, and action. This
memories,
is when we hear a story or when we tell a story, or both? Okay.
Both. A functional MRI of a storyteller and a story listener or reader, those functional MRIs are exactly the same.
Wow.
And the person's not, the person who's reading or listening to your story is not remembering your story because it's not their life. They're remembering something from their own life that's as close as their brain can get to you. That's what it's called, mental mirroring. And that's the magic of storytelling. We're all different, but our brains find ways to connect, not like making us all the same, but we're all different, but we find commonalities. That's the big so what of storytelling.
So wait,
getting
memory, tell us again. Memory,
emotion, and action. Like you want to do something. It's the most active and activating form of communication. It, draws on executive function, draws on empathy, and it brings together a lot of different brain functions. But the big thing is the way memories trigger emotion, both in the speaker and the listener. And in both those brains, connection is sought. Like we know how to do this.
Got you. And so our brains are actively looking. When I'm hearing a story, our brain is actively looking to search all the filing cabinets in the brain to find something about your memory that connects with a memory of mine that makes this relevant.
Yeah. Like when I often tell 11th grade students, like my father died when I was in 11th grade, and you can see on their faces the ones who lost somebody in their first 17 or 18 years of life. It happens immediately and they go there.
Yeah.
And if I tell about eating pizza with my friends or like sneaking beers out of my mom's basement and being like afraid she was going to kill me because my mom was like very strict, it connects. So, and you and I, do you remember that first like time we had like brunch together? Like there's all sorts of things that we figured out we had in common, sort of. So it's a great thing.
Experience too, Carol, in raising 2 kids who lost their mom at a very young age. I remember sitting down and watching Bambi with them. And that opening scene where everyone is, flitting along happily in this beautiful forest, and then Bambi's mom dies. Bambi's mom is shot. And to watch the look, I remember I was bringing in a tray of snacks, and to see the look on their faces still like chokes me up, and I think, gosh, every one of those Disney stories starts off with a mom not there. And I thought, wow, that Disney knew how to make those children, all children, feel so incredibly vulnerable, even if they didn't have the memory of missing their mom like my kids did. It's certainly every child's fear of what that could be if mommy wasn't there. Yeah.
You've got that exactly right, Susan. It's one of those crazy, miraculous things about Disney. I hadn't thought about that, That's really so interesting.
I've come to see it as one of the most manipulative things of Disney. in storytelling because, part of what you talk about is the science of storytelling, and that memory triggers that emotion. And with that comes this chemical waterfall of emotion that gets triggered, right? I mean, you get an adrenaline rush as a young child watching that horrific scene. I mean, it really is a first horror movie, almost, even fairy tale. And suddenly you get this rush of adrenaline where a child's heart is racing, going, oh my God, what's happening to mommy? And then suddenly you're sitting right in the palm of Walt Disney's hand, and all you're begging for is relief. What is the next emotional experience I can have that makes everything okay? And I'm wrapped at this point as a little kid. I can't leave the theater. I can't leave my seat. I have to know I'm going to be okay. And so tell us about that next, when you get to that emotion, what happens then?
So this is the thing that you have to unteach people, because people learn in school to tie everything up in a bow. That was the day I learned, that Walt Disney manipulates people through storytelling. Yeah. But the way you told it, which was like my stepchildren, you didn't even say stepchildren, you said the children I was raising, who'd lost their mom, and you were bringing them a snack. Like, you were just bringing me right into that moment. And that's what we do at Story2. We teach people, okay, you have these general experiences that you share with lots of people. And you think, and you've been told that you'll connect with people by sharing those big experiences. But in fact, it's counterintuitive. Go as close in as you can to your own emotional experiences, your failures, your learning. And we all know we don't learn on our good days, on your losses and your failures and your fears. And when you go into the specific moments of your own growth and your own vulnerability, the more specific you are, the more specific will be the memories that it draws out of the other person. And so resisting that happy ending, just leaving it so the person can ask, oh my God, what happened next? Right. Oh my God, how did that work out? Or I know exactly how you felt because the same thing happened to me when blah, blah, blah. And there you have it. You have a new relationship.
So that's the connector, is actually the open door, not the perfectly tied up with a bow. Exactly.
It's the vulnerability and it's the specificity and the vulnerability and the moments, the hard-earned moments, it's, and like we're taught to hide them. Like it's a continuous practice. Most people think of stories as like content, but there's also this structure of storytelling, which if you, it makes writing a lot easier. It makes persuasion a lot easier. And then there's the daily practice of storytelling. People who write daily live longer, suffer less depression and less dementia. Well, why in the world is that?
Wow, right? I never knew that.
It's that narrator. It's a kind of mindfulness, like that going to that metacognitive place of being the narrator and like watching your own life from outside. It's a tonic. It's like, okay, I've got it. I'm watching it. I'm narrating it. Like that gift that I got that day, I'd studied a lot of literature, but I'd never like seen it as something I could do with myself or other people. And once you do that, you notice that in every situation, there's multiple points of view. And it took me a long time, like when I'm about to have a fight with my husband or, about to just act on my anger, just like pause. It's like, okay, what is this person seeing here? And I just shift. Like this is 12 years of this practice. And I'm writing a book about this practice because it's life-changing for individuals and for groups, right? To be able to pause. Oh, okay, so that's what I think. And my thoughts come from whatever, from my past or my vision of the future. This person is a wholly different person, even though, I've been married to him for 36 years. He's completely different. And there's a ton of stuff I don't know at all. What might be going on for him?
Right. Even in this day, right?
In this moment, how can I describe what happened for me and where that came from for me that makes both me and him fresh, so we can go at this thing in a way that's not fighting? I just find this miraculous. That's the thing I really want to teach to people, is how you can just soothe yourself and just be open to the things that are right in front of you through the practice of storytelling.
Well, fascinating, because we hear so much about mindfulness and, becoming mindful in the moment of where one is, but to actually think about downshifting into, what if this had a different narrator? What if the story I'm telling, and I know listening to Brene Brown, she finds that the storytelling she does with her own spouse, she begins the conversation by saying, the story I'm telling myself is, and she repeats that to her spouse. And then he responds in kind with, the story I'm telling myself is. And that awareness of this actually just being stories, right? That we have real emotion around it, but they're really stories that we're constructing for one another. And if we can't break the dynamic of the same story over and over again, then it cracks after a while, because we get bored hearing the same story over and over again.
Exactly.
It's boring to have the same fight over and over again.
Yeah.
But like in what you teach through Story2, so let's take a step back from, well, correct me, there's one other piece, which is action, right? So that it is that memory, emotion, and then action. So do we tell a story with the anticipation that there needs to be movement afterwards?
So first of all, you inspire yourself, because the stories from your past energize you to do something that moves you to the future. And stories about your future, like really specific, present tense verbs, who's there, what season is it, what are they wearing? Like, you go to a specific moment in the future, that activates you to do the next thing in the present that will get you to that future. So the first thing that happens is you activate yourself, you inspire yourself. And through that mental mirroring, you inspire other people to believe in you. It's because and this is where, the community leaders playbook includes great storytelling, because you're inspiring people to do things together. And maybe things that are scary, or maybe things they haven't done before, or maybe things that require hard work in, like if you think about President Obama, and Michelle Obama as well, they're both just really extremely gifted storytellers. And they're building a community. They're driving a set of actions that builds a future.
I'm as you were talking, I was reminded of, Martin Luther King's mountaintop speech that he says, I may not get there with you, but I have seen the promised land. And then continues to talk about what that future is in the present tense. Yeah. I'm not fearing any man. I'm not, and that you can feel the motion of reaching the mountaintop, even knowing he may not be there. And there's a sense of victory. And there's a desire to get there, even though it feels like we're already in the future with you.
I believe that people who do, big transformative work in the world, like have a very palpable future sense. Because when I'm able to activate that for myself, and I'm actually really a novice at it, but so what's this going to look like when it's successful? Who's there? What shifts? Well, then what you do in the present is really clear. Like I met these two people for a meeting last week they want to do a partnership with Story2. And, everything's going really well. And then I don't even remember what I said that triggered this, but one of them said, well, I always believe the worst in people. I always believe the worst about people. I was like, okay, that one's over. I'm not going to partner with that person.
Wow. Like that is not in alignment with where my future is.
That's not where I'm going. And I am certainly not going to waste time partnering with somebody who has that as a core belief.
Who's waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, but that's from learning where's my story taking me? Where are my actions today? What future are they building? And we have so many choices. Minute to minute, day to day, we have so many choices. How do you make all those choices? Well, it's like having a very clear sense of future.
Yeah. So tell us about the innovation that is Story2. So this is an app, right? Is that how you define it? A platform?
So it's a web app. I mean, you can use it on your phone, but it was a web app, not a mobile app, but you can use it on your phone. So there are 5 steps of the Moments method, our proprietary storytelling method. You find stories, focus in on those specific moments of growth and change. You tell the story out loud, then you map it, tell it out loud, map it, so you organize. When you tell it out loud, it's all over the place. That's just how we remember, that's fine. Then you organize it. Then you pull over the text from the spoken story. The software transcribes your speech into writing. You pull it into the structured story. And then the 5th tool is focus out, is sentence by sentence editing, replacing generalizations with specifics, replacing thoughts that happen in your head with actions that happen in the world with other people, and replacing things that anybody could say with things that are really specific to your own lived experience, experience with other people in the world, shared human experience. If you do those 3 things sentence by sentence, that, you got to be patient, got to find a specific moment of change, got to be patient there, and you got to be patient on that sentence by sentence. But you can be a very good speaker and writer. Like 88% of people who use our software have improved their writing. And 94% say Story2 software improve their public speaking confidence. I mean, these are very high numbers for these kinds of shifts. And it's because it's simple. The science of storytelling, it's already in your brain. We're like unlocking it for people. We're not pouring it in, we're just helping them tap into it. And so the way the software works is it's finding stories, telling them, and then shaping them. And then the third part is that practice thing. It's like, well, who's the audience? What are they listening for? Because there's, certain stories, and especially our close to the bone stories, we'll tell them differently depending on who else is in the room. And, I often tell the story about, I was trying to figure out how to tell the story about sexual assault as a child. And I was,
that
just
what
like
was
trying
up in your box?
That was the thing. That's the thing. Yeah. And I've forgiven everybody. It's like, it's a long time ago, and everybody should be at peace with this stuff eventually after they work through it. I mean, there was a time when I had 3 therapists. Like, I was a hot mess. Let's just say I was a hot mess. So I'm like patient with people who are working through stuff. But I was just like trying with different audiences, and I was sort of getting it right sometimes. And then I tried to tell this story with a group of women entrepreneurs at UBS Bank. And it didn't matter that we were women or entrepreneurs, we were like sitting in a bank. And there's certain things, the minute I like even kind of got close, I was like, you just went a place you shouldn't go, girl. You
could feel them away. Yeah.
But, like when I call storytelling a practice, it's like, well, if you don't get it a little wrong sometimes, well, then you're just telling scripts. You're just saying the stuff you say all the time, exactly safe the way, and like, that doesn't help anybody. It does. You don't grow. The other people don't grow, and it's boring. And I don't like boredom. So I try new things.
But what was the impetus for this platform? Tell us about how this idea for putting this together as software. I mean, I understand you wanted it to scale, but first there was, getting this down on paper. Then there was turning this into a product. So what was the impetus for it? And then how did you make those shifts?
So I saw it. It was a waking dream on a very sunny Saturday morning, maybe a week or maybe 10 days after the day that the room started spinning. And I was sort of somewhere, what John Keats, the poet, calls a waking dream. You can't tell if you're awake or asleep. It's so real. And I see students in Shanghai and students in New York City, like very specifically those two places. They're chit-chatting on their phones and they're telling stories, and the kids in Shanghai are speaking in Chinese and the kids in New York are speaking in English. And there's like this storytelling thing is like the umbrella that allows them to communicate with one another, and the phones are translating. And that was before phones could do all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I woke up, I went to get a glass of water and a cup of coffee, and my son's sitting at the kitchen table. I said, Zach, you'll never believe the dream I just had. And he's in college. He's like tired. It's early morning. And he's like, well, that's really interesting, Mom. I think you should build that. It's like, I think you should start a company you could help a lot of people. And I mean, you see how happy that made me that morning.
Yeah.
It was like my son gave me the idea. The dream gave me the idea. My son gave me the idea. My father gave me the courage like a billion years ago. And it was just like, okay, I do love young people. That is true. And I also love inventing things. There's lots of people who are happy to do things the second time, the third time, the fifth time, the 10th time. I just really love the first time. And so, that's a mindset. And so I think it makes it crazy hard to work for me because the minute it's something, I want it to be the next thing.
You're on to the next. But you've been at this for a good long time now.
Yes. Yeah. We started we built the software in 2014 in Techstars. It was at the Kaplan, the second of two Kaplan EdTech accelerators. And that was a tremendous experience because working with Kaplan and working with Techstars and just all the people I met then, it was really a great, great experience. So that was 2014. And for a while, we just had this MVP that we were kind of adding features to. And then in 2018, I had to make a big decision. Are we going to refactor all the software and build it not as this, MVP with spaghetti code, but really rebuild it in a way that's scalable? Or are we going to do something else? We're going to sell it. We're going to whatever. And my dream of connecting, students in one country speaking one language with students in another country speaking another language, and storytelling, enabling them to connect across geography and language and cultural differences. I'd seen the possibilities of that in what we were doing. We'd help a ton of people learn English. I mean, I can tell you our data on that is ridiculous, but the building the communities across cultures I hadn't done yet. Yeah. And if we scaled we built software that was scalable, we could do that. Maybe not in one step, but that was, so I put a bunch of my own money in 2018 and 2019. I hired our current lead developer to just remake the software so it can be used for a wide range of use cases. Students applying for jobs, students applying to college, workers, to help people in sales and marketing and recruitment to use storytelling to authentically build community. So we've done a lot of different use cases, and a lot of what we have in terms of courses and how you can apply storytelling to achieve different ends. We have really a lot of courses. And, I love the company Pluralsight, which teaches engineering and data science at scale, mostly, B2B, they sell to big corporations. And I think of Story2 fully built out is the Pluralsight for communication skills. There's this bedrock of things you have to do properly all the time. Once you get that down, you can really build a whole other way of communicating than most people have access to most of the time.
And so as you've gone through this process, right, you've become a technologist, right? I mean, you've learned how to become a a person who understands both the art and science of storytelling, but then what is the tech that needs to rise up to meet that incredible platform? Because
I've been a technologist the entire 21st century. Just so you know, my first job when I left Rutgers, my first, tech job, EdTech job, was in a place called the Center for Electronic Texts in the Humanities. Very long name. There was no EdTech name then. And it was a Princeton, Rutgers collaborative think tank. And we were building the infrastructure for like the first scholarly Shakespeare and the Oxford English Dictionary online. Wow. And a version of the Declaration of Independence that just showed you all the different drafts, like really exciting stuff. But the internet couldn't move any of that stuff. This was the last years of the 20th century and the first years of the 21st century. The internet couldn't move any of that stuff. So we were building like these things that we knew eventually would be able to travel between people. And my boss, Susan Hockey, who's one of the really talented technologists. I'm really a humanist who loves technology, but she was really, she used to say that, things will always get faster and easier and more colors. Don't worry about that. That's simple. But if you don't build the structure right, this is I don't think there was Google then. Maybe there was, I don't think so. Maybe. She's like, they won't, when someone is searching, they won't know if they're searching for the word flower or a picture of a flower. So you have to code all that information properly. So, a much more further developed Google. Yeah, there was a Google, but not a very it wasn't very elaborate. Will be able to digest it. And I went for that. I took that job at the Center for Electronic Texts and the Humanities because I wanted, my scholarly expertise. My first book was about 17th century English women poets, the first generation of women to publish both in manuscripts and in printed books. And I watched how gender was reconfigured when they shifted from manuscripts to printed books. And I learned how to code so I could get those things into classrooms, like these very obscure, transitional women poets, political poets. If you waited for printed books, they'd never get into classrooms. So that was why I learned how to code. Yeah. And that was, and then I learned to do all sorts of other things. But so I've been doing technology for a long time. And I've been using technology for humanism for a long time. Not everybody looks at technology and says, okay, so the technology can take care of this so that we can do these other things which make us better humans. I think that's really, when I look at technology, it's well, what's that going to enable us to do in terms of human community? And that's what really interests me. That's let's scale the things that we need more of as humans.
So, and by the way, Google founded September 4th, 1998. So yeah. They were there, but their ability, like you said, to move information to all of us in a way, I remember calling it the Google never stop searching engine, because whether or not you can
slow.
I was just please let me have a find engine. I'm so tired of the search engine. I just want to find what I'm looking for.
It's hard to believe how slow things were, right?
Oh my God, just waiting for the website to download. If there was a picture on a page, you're like, oh, geez, I'm going to be here all week.
And I used to tell people, that people would say, oh, I'll never read anything online. I'll never. And I'm like, don't say never. No, don't say never. It's going to happen and it'll happen to you.
That's right. So as you bring this innovation to light, I imagine there are a bunch of naysayers who, on the storytelling realm, I'm currently reading, I love reading books by other storytellers and practitioners of storytelling. I'm just finishing Kendra Hall's new book, Stories That Stick. And she talked about defending her master's thesis in 2010, where her academic board, when she brought the premise of her thesis to them, said, and her thesis premise was essentially, storytelling is the glue that holds humanity together. I would like to prove this in my master's thesis. And its applications for business, therefore, are indisputable. And 3 out of 4 professors said, there's nothing here. Storytelling what? Like, why would we even consider this as part of a master's curriculum? Storytelling is for children. Like, there's no there there. And, with great influence and great storytelling, she was able to get the approval to actually write her master's thesis. But I'm curious about your own journey with storytelling and some of the pushback you may have gotten either by premise or technology to make this happen.
Yeah, so I've overcome a lot of pushback. The first big one was at Princeton. I was the first graduate student who was approved to use gender as a category of critical analysis in their dissertation.
And what you
I had to get the approval of my department chair, and then I had to get the approval of the dean. And it was I was like, those were some scary conversations.
What year was
that? Was 1980, like 6 or 7.
So 1986 or 7. And at this point in time, there is no gender-based analysis at the PhD level, right?
At Princeton. I'm sure there were places like Princeton Princeton's not usually the first place to do things. Like, they wait and they see the landscape, and then they're bold. I mean, who would have thought they would rename the Woodrow Wilson School? Because, even though he was president, he did a lot of things which significantly economically disadvantaged Black people, right? Like, that was a very bold move for Princeton. And I was told twice, both by the chair of my department and the dean of the graduate school, that I was being given permission to do this because I was doing primary research, and that my research would bear out, if I just stuck with the research, what the research showed was valuable, whatever it showed. And so that was, that's the very conservative premise of Princeton. Every undergraduate writes a thesis. You have to learn how to do primary research. That is where that kind of very process-based and fact-based and text-based, scholarship can actually be just radical and transformative. It's like, well, what's there? And then you see that, Anne Finch, the Countess of Winchelsea, whose poem, The Nightingale, influenced Keats' The Nightingale, which is to say he stole things from her. There's the version that she published in manuscript. There's a version she published by a lady. It's the first book I can find in English with that by a lady thing, which became so popular. And then in her book of poems, it has a very different, all of the politics has been stripped out because the political landscape has changed, and she's not concerned with being a political actor anymore. And she's not interested in the very complicated tension between being a political actor and a woman. And, all these things, it's just, bloop. It's like, I'm poor woman like a bird in a cage. But she didn't get there in one step, and she certainly wasn't born with that idea about being a woman. And I just found that all just immensely fascinating.
So
published it as a book, yeah.
Yeah. So your own research is kind of already looking at these obstacles women have to telling their own stories, right? And telling
yes, actually, yes. I hadn't thought of that, but yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah.
And so
there's so much, their lives are so complicated. So complicated. It's so interesting, so fascinating.
So in your own innovation story, as you bring this innovation to light with Story2, what were some of the obstacles that you faced along the way?
Oh, you did ask me about obstacles. I tend not to pay attention to them. I mean, I'm not going to be the first person to say how much sexism there is in technology, and how the privileging of young white men. And so, I was already 50, and so people are like, we don't need to take her seriously. I'm like, yes, you do. First of all, I can run circles around a lot of you on a lot of this stuff, but I never said that. But I'm like, when they started to be stupid and just dismissive again and again and again, It's like, okay, I'll show you. It might take me a long time, but I'll show you. And I definitely encountered sexism. I can't think of a significant moment in my life where it wasn't just there, and you have to, Mandela Dixon says, you have to keep going, like, do it afraid. It's like, you know what? I'm the first one, or I'm going to do it so the next person has it easier. But both sexism and, I would say, like, even since I was 40, ageism, like this privileging of kids, young people who are brilliant, and I love them. But, we have a lot of knowledge as older women in particular, from just like watching things the way we watch them. And I don't want to be essentialist, but like raising kids and taking care of people when they're passing from this world to the next world or whatever comes next, all of that tending and caring, like, just gives you an orientation that's valuable. And I feel like generally the fast pace of technology doesn't care about that stuff.
Or hasn't figured out how to value it. Because It's funny that you say that, because I spent so much time working with those young men around their messaging and positioning of their companies and helping them to tell the stories of their companies. And I have to disavow them so often of that first person view of the world in order to allow the customer view in, the user experience view in, the partner view in. And it is because I get to hold on to that I space for so long, right? And I'm encouraged and valued for always presenting it in the I, that I don't take into account the everyone else, the listener, right? So often I find myself repeating, make the listener the hero of this story rather than you. And there's a lot of time and effort spent undoing that little storytelling conundrum. They go, oh, right. This is for them, not for me.
Yeah, really.
So you're building this, and then when do you know you've hit success, Carol? When do you know it's real?
Well, I think for each person who learns to tell their own story, wherever they're coming from and wherever they're going, that's a victory every time, because that person's relationship to themselves and the world will be transformed. So that's a victory every time. Getting the software to the place where it was scalable, building the MVP, building the first thing, the company, the software, that was important, but then rebuilding it, line by line of code so it's scalable. I say that's a huge victory, because that's like, well, I may see the top of the mountain, or somebody else might see the top of the mountain, but there's an asset here. There's something that can be done with this code that can't be done other ways. So that was a huge victory. And now really where we are is more mundane, but really important stuff of building a company, building a company that will last, and making sure that as we grow, we keep our promises to our customers, and that we, build a culture that really takes care of like all the stakeholders, as you say, the customers, the team. Yeah, just like that everybody who works with us in any way experiences that practice of storytelling. Experiences, there's something different here. This is a different way of looking at other people and the world. Like, that's really, I want people to walk away from me and from Story2 understanding that there are always multiple points of view. And if you take the time to listen for those multiple points of view, your possibilities expand. Like, as much as you can listen to those multiple points of view. And that's, I know I will have succeeded when that book that I'm writing called The Golden Repair and Story2 are really, big enough and important enough that they live after me. Like, that will be really the big success, is this transformation in how people communicate.
And I thought you were going to say that fever daydream, right, that you had about New Yorkers and Shanghaiese folks talking to one another, when that becomes the day-to-day, right? That easy flow of story from one culture to a next. Are we there yet, Carol?
We're very close.
Oh,
We're very close.
yes.
10 days ago, our coach, Zoe, taught the Story2 Moments method at Jack Ma's school, the Yungu school in Hangzhou, China. And I couldn't be there except on a screen because I'm in America where we still have COVID. And so I can't travel anywhere. Nobody wants me. But Zoe taught she taught the first entering class of students at the Yungu school, Jack Ma's school, in Chinese, the Moments method.
Wow.
And I was there on Zoom. Like, it's happening. It's happening.
Oh, I got chills. And for our listeners who don't know, Jack Ma, one of the 17 founders of Alibaba, the Amazon of China, certainly bigger than our own Amazon, just by sheer number of deliveries, right? And the billions of people served in China, not just here in the United States, but wow. And to know that dream happened just 10 days ago, Carol, congratulations. That's amazing. We've been talking about this for a while. And I remember those trips that you were making to China and suddenly all came to a terrible halt with this pandemic. And that was so hard.
Yeah, I really miss traveling to China. And, and the
I don't
silly
hear that
things
often, by the way. I really miss traveling to China. It's not something I've heard a lot during the pandemic. My last interview with the innovation team at Corning that just opened 2 factories in Wuhan during the pandemic.
Oh my goodness.
And so, they are very happy to know that they're, that they are not on a plane, 4 times a month to go back to Wuhan.
Yeah. There's just something, I don't know. I have so many brilliant young friends in China. Like in China, I am really, I'm like a different version of myself. It's hard to explain, but it's really, it's just awakened in me, like things I didn't know about myself. All that traveling back and forth to China is just really awakening for me and really pleasurable for me.
Yeah. And it's a big trippy cultural difference, right? You step off that plane and suddenly everything is different when you
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a book about storytelling. I'm not remembering the title, but it basically tells the difference between Eastern stories, Western stories, and Asian stories. And in Western stories, the hero leaves home. Hero succeeds by leaving home. In Asian stories, the hero succeeds by finding and coming back to home. And I really think we need both those things,
That's so.
Those are like both partial truths.
It's true. It's like, and I mean, we have a saying in the West, right? You can never go home again.
Mm-hmm.
You can never step in the same river twice. Like we have these experiences where it's almost a little verboten to come back. Like we won't be well received if we do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
well, Carol,
I like that circularity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm curious if there's like a final thought that you think about that you want to share with our audience of innovators. Storytelling has been the constant companion of your innovation journey, and it's the heart of your innovation journey now. What do you tell innovators who still feel, imagine that PhD in chemistry sitting at the bench, the head of R&D at a large company, or, some chief innovation officer who's has to walk into that boardroom with an Excel spreadsheet and a stack of, statistics about what his projections are going to be for the next 3 years with that innovation. What is your thought around helping that next innovator with their story, making that connection available to the innovation community?
Well, dear innovator, you might not think this is the solution that I'm going to tell you, but the most powerful stories are always the ones that only you can tell. So the connection between you as a person and you as a CEO or chief innovation officer or chief technology officer and leader, it's those things that maybe are a little raw and you don't usually talk about. Or it might be just something that you experienced as a child that's driven you to be the kind of innovator you are. But really, storytelling begins in spoken stories about your own lived experience. So that's one. And two is I love to help people tell stories. So if I can help you tell your story, Carol at story2.com, I would love to hear your story. That's one. And two, I'm building a community of people who will use the Story2 platform and the Story2 Moments method to teach other things. So to teach branding and content marketing and sales and recruitment. And so if there's some part of your universe that you want to marry with storytelling to teach in a different way, I don't know exactly what this will look like, but I invite you to come participate in those conversations because we're really thinking about right now about what that will look like. And I'm always keen to talk to other innovators.
Fantastic. Carol, thank you so much for spending an hour with us and telling us all about the insights and that intersection between the art and science of storytelling. Please go to www.story2.com, and I'll be including all different kinds of links in the page as well, so you can find all the amazing things that Carol does. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Susan. This is really fun. I appreciate it.
This innovation story has ended, but yours is just beginning. Go to innovationstorytellers.com, download the free Innovation Storytelling Blueprint, and sign up to pre-order Susan's book, Innovation Storytelling. Get the resources, runway, and recognition you deserve due out this spring. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until the next innovation story.